Thanks a lot. Yeah, I will try to tell you something about the new regulation. We don't know a lot of it. That's a bit of a problem, but we come to that later. But I'm glad some people turned up, so I'm not speaking to myself this afternoon. I will try not to bore you this afternoon. It's Friday after all, so and if you have any questions or remarks, just give it to me. My name is Anne Schmidt. I'm a full-time lawyer in the city of Roermond, and I specialized in commercial and corporate law, and in the last 7 years of my practice I also took up estate law. Yeah, I was asked to tell you something about the new General Data Protection Regulation. Well, I'm not sure about you, but I'm not that good with abbreviations, so I'm just going to call it the regulation, because if I have to say GDPR every time, I'm going to stumble with words, and that's not that good. Well, as I said, if you have any questions, please holler. The General Data Protection Regulation will come into effect as of May 25th of this year, 2018. But actually it has been stipulated as of 2016. So we already have to deal with this regulation, but nobody does. And why is this regulation different from any other regulation? Because as lawyers, and I think you won't do the same, we're not spending our free time reading regulations. We're only humans after all. But this one is different because it surely will affect all of us and all of your companies and things that you do on a daily basis. I will, just a little bit later, I will tell you why. It's also special because the regulation is also special because its scope will fit virtually every country of the world and every data communication that is going on in the digital, but also in the analog world. The regulation comes into effect at least in the EER countries, which is the EU plus Norway, Iceland, and Liechtenstein. But it will, in fact, it will, well, we all will be encompassed by it. There's one kind of warning I have to do before I start off, really. I'm not a technician, so I can't tell you anything about the technical aspects of how data is processed or controlled. If you have any questions about that, don't ask me, but if we can have a discussion about that later, I hope you fill me in so I can do the legal stuff, because legal, that's what I do. So I hope we can talk about that later. Well, the regulation. Oh, it's gonna bit hard. Yeah. I already told you that I don't want to bore you, but you have to know a little bit about the background of privacy law in general. It stems from the 60s when in the USA mainframe computers were set up for the first time, and people saw the advantages of that, but they also had doubts immediately, because what happens to our private life and to personal data as of that moment, because it can be processed so fast and so unseen that people wanted to protect, as of that moment, wanted to protect their personal data. In that respect, we often use the word privacy. Privacy is actually just the private sphere of your life. Well, that cannot be or should not be evaded only if there's a necessary reason for it. That is privacy, but what we are talking about today is more about personal data. Your name, your address, your date of birth, and anything that amounts to you. So that started in the 1960s in the USA, and it swept over to Europe, and Europe took up privacy laws as well. But we always struggled a bit with the basic EU principle, the free movement of people, information, goods and information, which the latter is the most important in this respect, of course. Because both rights are in European legislation quite important and cannot and collide on a daily basis. The Netherlands, but also Germany, they have quite high standard privacy laws as of now. But there are other countries like Spain and Italy which, well, do not so well on the privacy part. And that is why the EER, or the EU, had decided to pick up the privacy regulations of the national laws which were in effect, and they wanted to harmonize that. And that is what this regulation we are going to talk about today is doing. As I said, it's going to be enforced as of May 25th, but it's already in effect 2 years right now, and still we don't know, really don't know what it's going to look like and what it's going to mean for any of us. And that's a bit strange, but I'll come to that just a bit later. This regulation tries to harmonize all the laws in the EER, and it mostly tries to give consumers possibility to enforce their rights. They have a lot of rights. We all know the right to be forgotten on Google, for instance. That's one of the rights this regulation has introduced. But up until now, we didn't have the means to enforce these rights. People didn't have a fist punch, and that's what this regulation is doing. So for the consumer, this is a great regulation, and their personal data will be protected as much, as it has never been before. But I assume you're all some kind of entrepreneurs or end users in some way, so you are commercial users of data, and that means that we have to comply with this regulation. And that means that we have to take quite some steps to, be better at protecting the data of the people we are all collecting. So that's why I put this one in, because you have to brace yourself. There are quite some things changing, and as I said, we don't know everything that is going to happen, but we know that there are changes that we have to pick up, all of us, and you have to be prepared to do that. Again, not wanting to bore you, but you need a little terminology to understand the regulation, or at least what it can mean. One of the most important terms in the regulation is personal data. And we all know that your name and your date of birth and your address amounts to personal data, but in the regulation it's not stipulated what it actually is, but we know that it's a very broad term. Everything that amounts to identifiability of you as a person or your consumer as a person falls under this regulation. I will do a little bit of a quiz later on, and we'll check whether you can check whether something is a personal data or not. What's important is to realize that it's not only digital data, but it's also analog data. We as lawyers work a lot with paper still. We're a bit traditional field of profession, unfortunately. So it also has effect on direct mailings and other letters and stuff you send out on paper. So think about that and encompass that. The second most important terms in the regulation are controlling and processing. anything you do with data amounts to controlling or processing, whether it's structuring, monitoring, controlling, altering, even archiving and deleting it is an action that falls under the regulation and which you have to, well, in some cases register and be aware of, and that amounts to the fact that the regulation is put up as broad as possible. The EU really has tried to encompass everything that is done with personal data to be caught by this regulation. And the fact that the terms controlling and processing are just so broadly termed are a testament to that. The funny thing is that also stealing data is an action which falls under regulation and has to be registered just like any other action under it. The last item or last term that is very important in this respect as well is territory, because some people think that you could dodge this regulation just by putting your main offices in the United States or Australia. Well, that's not going to help. Anything or anyone that comes into contact with the EU, or rather the EER, will be have to comply with this regulation. So if you are monitoring end users or consumers, or your servers are in any EU country, EER country, then this regulation applies to you, and that's something which is good to remember and to know, in fact. Even ships, planes and embassies, if they fall under a EER country, it also means that the regulation applies to you if you're on that. Because, yeah, well, companies like Google and Facebook and the like, they try to skip the regulation by putting their main offices in other countries which haven't got a regulation like we have here and in all of the ER, but that won't work. So I'd rather do a little quiz with you. I have put up some terms, and I would like to know whether you know this is a personal data or not. Job and education, yay or nay? Yes? Yes. Online behavior? Yay. Yes, that's true. Tracking cookies? Yeah, very good. IP and MAC addresses? X-rays? Who said no? I'm curious. Why? I thought so too. So, but it's yes. It's a personal data, because you can, in certain ways, identify someone by an X-ray, because everyone is different and all the bone structure is different. So it's personal data too. I didn't know that, so no harm done. And pharmaceutical research data. Yay or nay? Yay. It's a nay, because normally they are not identifiable. They are random, and the researchers don't know which persons they are, or people they are undergoing these processes. So normally, if you can't identify a person, then it's not personal data. But this is, I think this is a good example. This quick poll. That's not that easy to identify whether something is personal data or not. The easy thing to do is to assume it's always personal data. That's the most easy thing to do. The regulation has a few principles which are set down in the rules that are stipulated, and that's the main thing that changed. I already told you we had privacy laws before. There are quite some privacy rights that were used in the past too, but it didn't really amount to an accountability of companies who monitor and control data. And that's what's changed with this regulation. Companies are held accountable for the way they protect and use data. Actually, if you don't comply with with the regulation and with certain stipulations in that, you can be fined up to 20 million euros in fines, and up to 4% of your net your turnover, your annually turnover, worldwide. So there are really heavy fines that can be pushed upon you by national authorities. In the Netherlands, this will be the Autoriteit Persoonsgegevens. I'm actually not sure how it's called in German, but they probably have some kind of authority as well. Germans are quite good at that. I can say that, I'm German too. So there will be authorities which will really enforce this regulation, and well, we have to brace ourselves for that. There even accountability in the respect of this regulation also amounts to registering and being honest and transparent about what you do with data, why you collect it, how you protect it. And for certain actions, mainly monitoring data on a big scale, as of, I don't know, if you use tracking cookies, you monitor people or people's behavior on a big scale. That means that you have to have a permission to do so. We all know the cookie statements and the privacy statements on websites. This is where that stems from. For certain actions, you need the permission of the end user or the consumer, before you can execute that action. So it's not an afterward permission, it has to be granted beforehand. Permission can also be granted not only by unambiguous statement, but also by law. In some medical respect that's possible, or in criminal law aspects, but also by the contract. I don't know whether any of you or some of you use general terms and conditions. We as an office do, and you can put some requests for permission in your general terms and conditions, but they only apply, or the permission is only granted if someone replies to it. So you have to be very explicit. The difficult thing is a consumer can retract that permission at any time. So I can give you permission now, and in about 5 minutes I don't feel like it anymore, and I just tell you, just leave it. My permission is hereby retracted. And you have to act upon that quickly and swiftly, and without restrictions or limitations. That's something that will have quite some practical impact, I would say. But how that plays out, I don't know. Even I'm not a die-hard privacy lawyer, but even the ones who are, I know some of them, they don't know either. Also, the judges in the Netherlands and all the other EER countries don't know how they are going to apply this regulation. So just, well, try to comply to it, and we'll see where that gets us. Two other things that are come into effect when this regulation will be enforced as of the 25th of May are privacy by design and privacy by default. I guess I don't have to tell you what that is, but I put it in my presentation, so I just will. privacy by design means in this respect that you are obliged to design your products and your services in a way that the personal data is as protected as can be. You are also not allowed to monitor or collect more data than is absolutely necessary. On the other hand, privacy by default means that, again, the consumer gets tools to build their own protection and to tell you, well, I want to tick this box or I don't want to tick this box. It can be, you can't force that upon the consumer anymore. That's something that has really changed as of to how it was before. Yeah. There are some things that we all have to deal with, or probably a lot of you have to deal with. There are some key aspects. Okay. Oh. There are some key aspects which, yeah. If you monitor and control data on a great level, on a high level, you will need a data protection officer. This is a person who cannot be part of your company. It has to be an external person who controls and advises you on privacy matters. If you are monitoring and structuring data on a great level, think about tracking cookies, then you need this data protection officer. In the Netherlands, there are quite some companies which educate DPO's, as they are called, so they can be they can work for companies like yours and mine. It's not really. We don't know how this is going to practically going to play out, because it's someone who is external from your company, and you have to give him all the access to see all the data in your company. Well, our field of profession is quite addicted to confidentiality. We don't have. I cannot tell you who I work for or I don't, or which cases I represent or I don't. And on the other hand, you should show that data to people who are not working for you. That's going to be a bit weird, but we'll see how that plays out. Another thing you have to do, we all have to do, is to register the processes you execute in your company. You, as I told you, a lot of stuff you do, archiving, deleting, structuring, monitoring, amounts to processing as meant by the regulation. And you have to keep registrations of these actions and these handlements in digital registers, because the national authorities can always ask you. National authorities, that's not good. Yeah. National authorities can always ask you to show your registers, and if you don't have a register or it's not complete or correct, you can be fined. It's quite good to be clear on the fact that every little thing you do is a process, and every little thing, as I said, also the deleting of files, for example, amounts to a process in respect of this regulation. And you have to have a file that lists all these actions. It's quite a bit of work, and I don't know how we're going to practically play this out, but well, we'll see about that when it's the 25th of May. But well, we have to comply with it, so we'll all have to find a practical way to deal with this. The last principle that this regulation, important principle that this regulation has, is the data privacy impact assessment. It means that every new action you add to your services or products will have to be assessed before you execute it. That means that you have to check in advance whether you are going too far with this action. The EU thinks that in respect to collecting or processing personal data, less is more. Many people and companies don't think so because, well, every data we can collect and can monitor and structure, we can extract all kinds of information from it. So this really collides with each other, and the regulation puts quite some harsh practical strains on our daily work. This data privacy impact assessment has also be registered in your process registration, and you have to update it every time you do something new. I see people shaking their heads, and I know why. I hope it's not my presentation, but there are a lot of things we will have to do, and nobody knows how we are going to do it, and that's quite weird, actually, seeing the fines that can be put on every one of us. A key aspect of this regulation is also the use of the data, and that's another thing I just told you. The privacy by design and privacy by default means that we should use as little data as possible, because then the regulation would not apply. As I told you in the beginning, it's not really possible to dodge the regulation, so you will always have to comply with it. But, well, this is the questions consumers are going to ask us. What you're going to do with my data? And now they have the rights to do so. They already had the rights to do so, but they have also the means to enforce that. I listed some of the consumer rights. Some are new, some are old, or we already knew. But I think the most popular is the forget me right. You can ask not only Google, not only Facebook, but also you as people who operate websites or send mailings or I don't know what. People can ask you to forget them, and you have to. And it's the same with the permission I told you earlier. It can be retracted at any time. So if people don't want you anymore, you have to comply with that. And what the EU really did was give the consumer the tools and the means and to enforce their rights a lot better than it was in the past. So it's all a bit gloomy and a bit negative, I guess, because I think many of you would have wanted me to give you some more practical advice on what we are going to do, or what we have to do. But the truth is, I can't. Nobody knows how it's going to play out. There are some guidelines, principles which we have to follow, and well, we have to see how that works out. My advice is keep up with the news, read up upon it, try to at least register the big actions you take in your company and register that and list that, so that you at least know where the pitfalls may be. So that you at least know, well, this is an action in my company that, well, it's not that good in protecting data, and what can I do about that? You should show your national authority that you're doing it, that you're trying to work it, and that you're doing your best to comply with it. And if that's not working, well, give me a call. Then I'll try to fix it, as we do. So that's it for now for me. But I was curious. I wanted to ask you whether what you think about the regulation. I don't know whether you knew about it before or that you heard about it this afternoon for the first time. But many people I talk to are quite shocked by it, and I see nodding. Okay, I'm quite shocked by it and are quite overwhelmed by the things you have to do. There are, privacy officers, that's just a cost. It's just something you have to deal with also financially. It's not that you don't want to do stuff in your daily line of work, to make an Excel sheet. It's not to enlist your actions. That's not the problem. But to actually pay someone to be a privacy officer is quite a step far ahead. But I don't know whether you agree with that, or that you think, no, we have to protect all of the personal data, and that goes above all.
It's unmanageable to comply to all those rules.
I agree.
Yeah.
I think in the practical sense it will be very difficult.
It's going to work. It's like this.
Yeah, I agree with you. You know, in the past, the privacy regulations weren't often enforced. People didn't really take that up, but I think it's going to take a fly, and we will see a lot of lawsuits and companies who will try to protect themselves of complying with this regulation. But as of now, we all have to, and I hope you do, so that we won't meet in that respect, so that I don't have to help you. But well, we have to deal with that, and we have to see how it plays out after the 25th of May 2018. So thank you for your attention, and if there's any questions, I answer them gladly.